Dehancer review take. Look, I'm not a video professional. I'm not a camera professional. I mean, I love cameras. I love photography. I love videography, cinematography, but that's not actually what I do for a living. At least not in the traditional sense. What I am professionally is a 3D artist. And what that means is I do illustration, animation, motion graphics, renderings, etc. for a broad range of very satisfied clients. So yeah, even if I'm an absolute nobody in the camera, photo, video scene, in the 3D art world, I am somebody. So to nobody's surprise, my cup runneth over. Among the countless inquiries, booking requests, love letters, I actually found this email from the team at Dehancer asking if I could take some time out of my already very busy schedule to do something for them. To which I said, So anyway, what is Dehancer? You're probably asking. Well, let me tell you. Dehancer is film emulation software developed over a decade of lab-based research on genuine film stock, delivering an authentic analog look while offering tools for creative color grading. So does it mean it's going to make my 3D renders better, stronger, faster? Let's see. But before we do anything else, of course, it is disclosure time. Yes, Dehancer gave me the software for free. I mean, how else am I supposed to test it? However, in their own words, we are looking for an honest review as it can help us improve, so we do not impose any requirements on what you say about Dehancer. How nice. And yes, they also provided affiliate links, which I'm pasting below. So if you decide that you want Dehancer, you can visit them through said links. And if you use promo code SOMENERVE, you get 10% off any of their products. I get a little money out of it too. So, with all that out of the way, let's do this. Yeah, I don't know about that one. Let's go. All right, so here we are in DaVinci Resolve's color page. On the left side, you can see the footage that we're going to be working with. This is something that I rendered out of Houdini using the Redshift rendering engine. And yeah, I think it should have a decent enough amount of color information that should make it a good test subject for our Dehancer experiment. So on the right side, we have the node graph. I already started doing a little bit of housekeeping, just throwing in these two ACES transform nodes, which essentially works similar to what the color space transform does, but specifically for ACES footage, because what I'm rendering out of Houdini with Redshift comes out specifically in ACES CG. So what this first node does is it converts it from ACES CG to ACES CCT, and then the second one goes from ACES CCT to, in this case, sRGB, which is our output color space. It could also be Rec 709 if you wanted to do that, but in this case, sRGB is fine. So why am I doing these two nodes as opposed to just using the one ACES transform node and converting from ACES CG to sRGB? Because I actually want to be able to work in that ACES CCT color space in between these two nodes. Why? Because that gives you a wider gamut, which has more information, has more data. It gives you more wiggle room in terms of doing color grading, correction, etc. And the good thing is that Dehancer, if I throw it in here, not plugging it in yet, if you look at the very top in the input section in source, you can choose various color spaces here, including ACES CCT. So I'm going to choose that and then plug it in. And there you go. Now we have Dehancer applied to our footage in the ACES CCT color space. So before I get started, I'm going to hit Shift F. That way we have a larger view of what's going on here. So typically I would go from top to bottom, but for starters, I'm just going to scroll all the way down and click on Disable All Tools. That gives me a bit of a blank slate. And yeah, we can just, again, go from top to bottom and figure out what each section does. This is not going to be a deep dive, so I think we're going to speed through a lot of it just to give you a feel for what Dehancer can do. So the input section, we already looked at source, but then we have exposure compensation, temperature, tint, defringe. I think the defringe options specifically only really apply when you're looking at footage that has some kind of color fringing and maybe other lens aberrations, because this is a 3D render that doesn't really apply. So these probably won't do that much. Yeah, specifically the defringe options. But anyway, I think I'm going to leave these at their defaults, so then I can move on to the next section. The next section is the film emulation section. If we enable that, we can see that the default profile of Kodak Vision 3 250D is applied. I kind of like what this one's doing already, so I might leave it there. But yeah, if we scroll through this list, you see that there's a lot of options. I'm just going to click on a random one, see what it does. And combined with the push-pull slider, that gives you a lot of possibilities for looks. So you could very well spend a lot of time in this section. But anyway, I think the default was working fine, so I'm going to leave it as it is and then move on to the next section. Film developer, enable that. Contrast boost, self-explanatory, boost your contrast. Gamma correction, you can basically just further correct your gamma after applying the contrast boost. Color separation, also I think self-explanatory, affects the color separation. I think the default of 100 was working fine, so I'm going to leave it there. Color boost, of course, it boosts your color or desaturates it. I think I'm just going to boost it a little bit like that. And if I toggle it off and back on, I like what we're seeing here. So great, I'm ready to move on. Next section, film compression, enable that. I'm going to crank up the impact. This is just basically a blend slider. Crank it all the way up so I see what each of these is doing a little more easily. The white point compresses your highlights, as you can see. I think the default looked fine. Tonal range compresses, I think, maybe your mid-range or your overall contrast. I think also this one, the default looks okay, maybe a little bit higher. And then finally, color density will also, of course, affect your color density. And I think the default, maybe higher than the default, maybe somewhere closer to 85 works fine. And again, toggle it off, toggle it on. I think this is maybe a little too much. So maybe bring the impact down to like 50%, 50 something percent. And I think that looks fine. Good. Great. Love it. Next section, expand. Enable that. I think that just basically allows you to further tweak your contrast by adjusting the black point and white point. You could certainly do something like this if you wanted to. I don't. But anyway, I think this section comes in handy as something to kind of like compensate for what other sections are doing. So for now, I'm going to leave it alone. Maybe I'll come back to it. We'll see. The print section, if I enable this, the linear profile doesn't really affect your footage in any way. But if I choose another one like Cineon film log, the Fujifilm print, the Kodak print, and the Kodak glossy paper, they all have different looks to them. I kind of like the Kodak glossy paper, but you know, let's try and keep it quote unquote filmic. So I think one of these two is going to work. I think the Kodak one works for me in this case. So I'm going to choose that one. I'm going to adjust the target white, which basically just either warms up your footage or cools it down. I think I want it to be a little warmer. So around here is fine. It's starting to look a little dark for me, so I'm going to bump the exposure up just a little bit. I think that's fine. And I don't know that I would need to add more contrast really, but maybe just a little bit. I think that's fine. A little goes a long way. Color density, I'm going to also turn it up a bit, but again, a little goes a long way. Don't want to overdo it. So this I think is fine. And then I can choose to desaturate it a little bit or not. I'm going to keep it at full saturation. And then if I enable this analog range limiter, that further just compresses what's going on into a quote unquote analog range. Someone would probably have a better explanation of how this works, but yeah, I just think it looks better. So I'm going to leave it on. Okay, great. So if I toggle the section off and on, you can see what it's doing. And yeah, looks great to me. I love it. Moving on. Next section is color head. And again, this allows you to just do further color correction. You can add more yellow or more blue. I think I want more yellow, keep warming it up a little bit. Magenta or green, I think I'll leave this one as it is. And then finally, the cyan or red balance. Maybe a little more red. Maybe I want to keep warming it up a little bit. Again, just a little goes a long way, not trying to overdo it here. And then finally, if I want to do some split toning, I can. If I want to cool down the shadows, I could. That's a bit too much. But something like that, and then still warm up the highlights a bit, warm up the midtones a bit. I can tweak the exposure preservation. I don't know that it's doing a lot here. And then finally the impact, which is of course just a blend slider. So I think 100 looks fine. And again, let's disable, enable. Looks great to me. I am ready to move on. The next section is film grain, self-explanatory, of course. I'm gonna enable that. I think this looks great already at the default, quite frankly. You have a lot of profiles to go through. Of course, the lower you go on the profile list, for example, 8 mil, the grain is gonna be a lot more coarse. And if you go all the way up to 65, then you have much finer grain. And of course, you can customize this to your heart's content. You can really go crazy with it. So really, really fantastic stuff. But I think the default works really well for me. If anything, I'm just gonna crank it up to 50%. And yeah, I think that looks great. Love it. So moving on to the next section, halation. Turn it on. The default is doing something. If I go even lower to the Super 8 profile, I like what it's doing. I think I'm going to go into custom here. I'm going to crank up the smoothness. I'm going to crank up the diffusion, both local and global, amplify it. I think the hue is, yeah, maybe a little more yellow to it. Maybe turn down the blue compensation a bit, and then crank up the impact. And of course, this is a lot. I don't necessarily think that I want to do this much, but just to show what the effect is doing. Also, if you go into mask mode, that allows you to see what areas of the footage are being most affected. I think that's pretty useful. So good to know that there's an option for that. But anyway, again, too much. I'm going to take it all the way down and then maybe bring it back up a little bit until you start seeing something happen. And I think that is enough. Maybe I'll bring it up a little bit more. Yep, that works for me. Ready to move on. Bloom, similar concept, enable that. Again, you have these profiles, Super 8, I think looks good to me. You can, again, customize it to your heart's content if you want to. I think, no, I think I want to leave it as it was. Super 8 works well. Maybe just bring it down a bit. Yep, I'm happy with this one. I'm ready to move on. Great, Bloom, done. Then film damage, turn it on. Basically what this does is it gives you these scratches, dust, hair, etc. And as the previous sections implied, the further down the list you go in terms of the profile, the more dramatic the effect will be. So here we are in the Super 8 profile, and of course it's a lot of scratches, a lot of hair, a lot of dust. Yeah, definitely further helps you grunge up your footage if that's what you wish to do. And I don't think I would want to use this with this specific clip, but I'm going to keep it on just to illustrate what it does. Film breath, enable that. And again, I'm going to go to the Super 8 profile because that typically gives me the most dramatic effect and I can really observe what it's doing. And as you can see, it just adds this kind of a color flicker, which again, combined with film damage, further makes it feel like it's like old tape or something. And as you'll see with Gate Weave, it continues to add to that. Again, choosing the Super 8 profile makes things just like a lot more jittery. Again, feeling like bad old tape. Again, further grunging up and quote unquote retrofying your footage. Great, Gate Weave is done. Finally, we have Overscan, which adds these gate overlays to your footage. It's an interesting effect. I don't know that I would use it a lot personally, but it's good to know that it's there. I think for certain specific projects, it could be useful. I don't think it works with this specifically, but again, just to show you that it's there and what it does. Again, as I said, I don't think I'm going to use Overscan. I don't think I want to use Gate Weave or film breath or film damage with this specific clip. So I think this is enough. The only final thing that you can add here in terms of a visual effect to your footage is Vignette, of course, and self-explanatory what it does. I'm going to enable that. I'm going to go into mask mode. That allows me to see where the, I guess, like point of emphasis is. And of course, I can click and drag here. That's cool. If I want to emphasize another part of the footage, I can definitely do that. But I'm going to keep it at the default in the center. That's fine. Disable mask mode. I can crank down the exposure, adjust the feathering, and then maybe adjust the size. And I could, of course, adjust the aspect ratio if I wanted to. I'm going to leave it spherical. I think that's fine. I actually don't know if I want to apply a vignette to this footage. Maybe just a little bit, maybe a subtle one. Yeah, I think that's okay. And I think that's it in terms of the visual effects that you can add. After that, you have basically just like some monitoring options, including false color. You have a clipping indication option here. Luckily, nothing's clipping here, so we're good. And of course, you have your total impact slider. So you can see the original version without Dehancer applied and with Dehancer, without and with, or somewhere in between. I actually think Dehancer is making an absolute big difference here, and I like 100% what it's doing, so I'm going to leave this at 100%. So great, done with that. Then we have the LUT generator. It allows you to, if you really love what happened here and you want to be able to apply it across the board to other footage, maybe in other non-linear editors or share it, etc., then you can export a LUT from this. And then finally, you have the playback quality options, which by default, it's normal. It's a little bit faster. You can also choose higher quality. Of course, it's going to be slower. Typically, what I would normally do is to work in normal, and then once I'm ready to render, then I'll change it to high. Of course, just get ready to wait a little bit longer for that to happen. But in a lot of cases, normal has worked out fine, and I haven't even thought about going into high. But there's an option. You can use it if you think it's going to work out for you. And once again, this is before and after of what the rendered footage looks like before applying Dehancer and after applying the changes that we just went through in Dehancer. Followed by a small handful of older renders that I also decided to test out with Dehancer. As well as camera footage, in this case from my Nikon or Nikon ZR. So there you go. Anyway, what are my thoughts on Dehancer? Yeah, you can get some pretty sweet looks out of it, and you also get a ton of film emulations and parameters. And of course, all this power comes at a cost. Not only financial, obviously, but also time. Time out of your life that you could be devoting to so many other things. All these film stocks, emulations, parameters, etc. means that you're probably going to be spending a significant amount of time getting familiarized with it, at least the first few runs with it. So yeah, you can really spend a lot of time in there. A lot of time. To be fair though, I think like once you've gotten the hang of it, you can move through it pretty quickly. However, it's not exactly the most lightweight, efficient, and fast plugin to work with. I mean, it was fine when I was using it with 1080p HD footage, which is what most of these renders were in. But once I start trying it with 4K, 6K, etc. footage coming from my camera, for example, things start to get kind of bogged down. And this was on a pretty, what I considered, souped up 3D workstation with all the bells and whistles. So Sure, there's some ways around it. Like, for example, there's some pretty helpful YouTube videos on that if you go to the Dehancer channel, but still kind of frustrating, especially when I compare to DaVinci Resolve Studio's own built-in effects like Film Look Creator and some others. It definitely feels like Dehancer is less efficient. But I guess that's the trade-off for having something that offers more and arguably higher quality. So does it look so much better that it's going to be worth your extra money and time? Maybe. I think that's up to you to decide. Personally, I really like the looks that I was getting out of Dehancer, but I don't know that I can sit here with a straight face and tell you that, you know, before I found it, it felt like there was something missing, and this is now filling in some giant gap in my heart or something. Because it's not. I promise. So is it a must-have? To be honest, for most people, probably not. Is it a nice-to-have? Absolutely, 100%. It's a very nice to have. It's a great to have. It's an amazing to have. But it's not a necessity. Can you afford it? If you can afford it, absolutely, 100%. Go for it. It really cannot hurt to have such a good-looking tool in your arsenal. And with that in mind, if 10% off is what's going to make Dehancer affordable to you, remember that you can actually get 10% off if you visit their website via the links below and use promo code SOMENERVE. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.